The Browns interviewed Grant Udinski, and he's on the list for a second interview. I know you wrote an article about him. 30 years old is awfully young for what is expected of an NFL. Take us through that article.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine being 30, now that I'm too far away from it, and trying to be a head coach. He's only been in the league a couple of years, or maybe it could be 4 or 5 by now. He started with Minnesota and then was in Jacksonville for 1 year as coordinator. Hasn't called plays, has never called plays. I mean, he got done playing college football in 2018. So, it's a quick rise to where he is. Obviously, he's incredibly smart. Worked with Kevin O'Connell in Minnesota, which is good to have you on your resume. O'Connell raves about him. Goes down and works for Liam Cohen, who did a really good job with Jacksonville this year. He raves about Udinski. So does Trevor Lawrence, the Jaguars quarterback. So there's a lot of reason to like him and feel good about his future. The question is, at 30, are you ready for everything that comes with being a head coach? And I just don't know how you know that. And you could get it right, right? Sean McVay was 30 when the Rams hired him. His background's a little different. McVay's grandpa was in the league, and he'd been around it a long time. He'd worked for the Shanahans. So, but if you get the right guy, I don't know. It doesn't matter how old he is, right? Andrew Berry was the youngest GM, and we can argue whether or not he's been a success. But I don't. Age doesn't matter, but it's certainly risky. And if you're the Browns, are you willing to take that risk for a guy that you think might have just a crazy ceiling, but could also fail, right? And a year from now, you're going, oh my gosh, you need a new coach. He wasn't ready. And there's plenty of, not only, forget the young part of it, just the hot young coordinator, right? That gets hired. I mean, they always get hired, and a bunch of them don't work out. So it's not a guarantee. It's never a guarantee. At 30, I feel like it would be less of a guarantee.
Yeah, here's the concern I have with the young guys. Udinski, Shieldhouse. You're going to ask a guy who's never been a head coach before to be a head coach. On top of that, neither of those guys have called plays, even if they're the offensive coordinator. So they're likely going to want to call plays because that's the reason they're getting the head coaching job. They're going to have to identify and develop a franchise quarterback. On top of all that, you're going to ask him to deal with everything that is involved with being the head coach at this franchise, which last year it was, why isn't Shedeur Sanders getting first team reps? A couple years ago it was the whole Deshaun Watson. There's always something that you have to deal with as a head coach, especially with this franchise. Is that a legitimate concern, or am I making things up because I'm jaded because I've been watching this for so long?
No, I think that's a legitimate concern. Now, I think every organization has issues that the head coach has to deal with, right? Whether it's guys getting arrested or a guy in a car accident or whatever, right? Speeding tickets, whatever it is, that happens across the league. Uh, and I don't know if it's because we're here and we're focused on it. It feels like it happens more here. Um, I know there's so much interest, so maybe you get more questions about it here than you would in a smaller quote unquote media market like Cincinnati or Charlotte or wherever. So I think that's a legitimate point, David. Now, I would say Kevin Stefanski, when he got the job, was 37. And he had called plays for like a year and a half. So he'd been in that position, but he'd never been a head coach. He'd only been with one organization. Um, so he had to navigate all that and did tremendously well, which is probably one of the other things that the Falcons looked at and the rest of the league looked at. So it can be done, and it's 37, that much different from Shieldhouse at 35 or Udinski at 30. It's interesting. So it can be done. I mentioned McVay. There's other young coaches that have done it, but there's a ton on your plate, and maybe you could ship off the play calling, so you don't have to do that right away. But you're right about the quarterback, and I do think people underestimate the amount of non-football stuff that a head coach is responsible for. Whether it's the constant dealing with the media, the travel schedules, all that, you have to answer so many questions as a head coach that I think the longer you're around it, the more you appreciate that. Now, Udinski did have that chief of strategy role with O'Connell in Minnesota, so he saw what Kevin O'Connell went through on a daily basis. So I do think that helps him prepare, but being in those shoes is a whole different animal.